So when I got asked to do this, I was trying to think about what topic I should talk about. And I thought about, kind of my experiences and what you might all be interested in. And so I'm here to talk to you about cloud and emerging technologies and really some processes and how to engage those and make sure they're sure. But ironically, before the session, I caught up with Phil Venables out there, and we were talking, and he had made a comment to me about, well, Rich, it's not like your reputation hasn't been a disruptive leader in any organization that you've gone to drive change and actually implement. So I think based on his support of that, I think I hit the right topic, and that's what I'm going to focus on today. So first and foremost, when I look at whether it's cloud or future emerging technologies, what should we be thinking about and how do we get it done? No longer are we at a place where we're thinking, should we do cloud? We're there. So now it's about enabling it. We have emerging technologies coming in. Jim had mentioned quantum computing. It's not a matter of if, it's now when. So what do we do about it? When I think about these types of issues and address them, I always start what I think is the most important item: talent. What are we doing to ensure we have a workforce that is enabled to deal with things like cloud security and any other type of emerging technologies? Now, I'm a big history buff, and for those of you that don't remember, I remember the initial information security wave, right, which was the late 1990s, early 2000s. And boy, was that a fun time. I still remember all the training. There was so much training available. Some of you might remember. I'd love to get a show of hands of anybody. Whoever went on one of those really great training sessions in a resort somewhere, maybe down in Miami, or even some that rented cruise ships. You go on a cruise ship for a week to learn how to configure your firewall. It was a fun time because no one had the knowledge, and companies were willing to send their people to go get trained, and the different training organizations took advantage of that. But the real story there is the fact that we had to get smarter on all this new information security concepts and vendor products, and then the integration of those. Well, nothing has changed. Cloud is really a different discipline. And although we understand the characteristics of being good information security professionals, we have to learn to operate. We have to make sure the configurations are right and do all the things that we've done in the past, regardless of what new technology or capability has been enabled. So spending time investing yourself, but also your organizations and your teams to get more knowledgeable. Now, I'm a big fan of the more hands-on rather than theoretical, but theoretical is important. So there's also a push at the college level, right? There's cloud certificates, cloud security certificates. Obviously, we have the Cloud Security Alliance as just one of many things out there. But I cannot emphasize enough the importance of spending the time, money, and investments to ensure you have a workforce that can deal with cloud security or any emerging technology. When we first started getting into cloud, I remember there were a lot of people that just jumped in and suddenly they were the cloud experts. Many of you might remember that as you were beginning to think about cloud. And I watched them struggle. It wasn't a matter of them not wanting to do it, and they had all the right tools, but they didn't really understand cloud. So keep that in mind when somebody raises their hand. Give them the opportunity. But as leaders, our jobs are to make sure we provide our teams the right environment so that they can excel. And part of that is giving the background and the training to get it done. So it's very, very important. And I'm glad to see that we're doing so much in this area. And more importantly, we're actually now getting it off into the universities and master's degree programs and different certificate programs. Because it's about the critical thinking associated with the new emerging technologies and cloud. Because as far as I'm concerned, cloud is still emerging, right? Because it's still changing and growing. So talent is critical to everything that we do. And obviously you all being here today supports that. So the next thing to think about, whether it's cloud or emerging technologies, is, okay, here we are presented with this new environment, and we'll use cloud as an example. So how do we do this? How do we move applications? How do we enable workloads in this new operating environment? I suggest that's a shift. That's a shift in how we do traditional security, but very similar. You could almost simplify it and say, we've just outsourced the infrastructure. So as security professionals, we're primarily focusing on layer 7, making sure that that application as secure as possible before it migrates to the cloud, or the data before it migrates to a SaaS platform. So fundamentally, if you think about that, and again, you think about any type of emerging technologies, it's about making sure you understand before you're moving that particular either service, technology, or approach, are you doing it in the most secure fashion? Many of us have obviously been a part of cloud environments where we have the typical just lift and shift, right? Where we haven't thought about the security or the cost associated with securing it once it's been moved. And theoretically, everyone knows that, but the culture of an organization, time, commitments, budgets drive that. So what I would encourage you to always think about, still today, depending on where you're at in your cloud journey, but any emerging technology, is get ahead of the ball. Get ahead of the business, get ahead of the mission, get ahead of the culture, and say, what do I need to do to put in place to make this transformation as successful as possible? Embrace the change rather than fight the change, and figure out a way to do it. So let's think about cloud today. Let's think about you're going to be moving into an environment and you've got all these different applications you're looking to move. What should you be thinking about? How do I make that application as secure as possible? What does that mean? Depending on your maturation, depending on the tools that you have, depending on how much you want to invest in it. But the most clear thing to do is to make sure that the application is as secure as possible. Traditional vulnerability management, removing all those risks. Think about the emerging areas, API security, right? When we go into the cloud environment, even more APIs being utilized and the risks associated with it. Do you have an API security program? Identity and access management, right? One of the biggest risks when you're moving into that cloud environment just because of the unique operating environment. Compliance, configuration issues. You know, if you study breaches, you know, the most effective approach for an adversary is not complexity. It's the simple things. Phishing emails and checking for configurations, checking for open doors and open windows, and they take advantage of them. So ironically, we haven't done a good enough job, in my opinion, to make sure when we're going through that transformation and we're moving to that cloud environment, or again, any type of emerging technology, what do we need to do before it happens to give it the lowest risk of probability of exploitation? Reducing the attack surface. No different than the way we talk about traditional security today. So as we look at providing what we need to the organization to successfully migrate, it's about putting in place a process. Many ways of doing that. I'll just share one. I just went through a series of different potential controls, putting in place the governance for an organization that says before that application is able to migrate to the cloud, it has to pass a security posture score. Sound familiar? We had this thing once upon a time called NAC, and we said your asset wouldn't come on the environment until it passes a particular security posture. Oh, think about this. That's a traditional network. Now, we're basically running our stuff on in a cloud environment, same type of thing. What minimum security posture should you have for a workload, an application, or anything that is allowed to work in this new pristine operating environment? What still causes me to do a strategic pause is when I think about we spent all this money partnering with a cloud provider who has, I'll call it a pristine environment, and then we take something that's old, crickety, and full of holes and put it on it and say, we're going to be more secure because we're riding in the cloud background. Now, the cloud environment gives you that traditional infrastructure hygiene and things that may be oftentimes hard with legacy systems. But don't kid yourself. If you haven't taken the time to secure that application, right, the day of reckoning is coming. Now, having done this, I know you're all sitting there saying, Rich, yeah, but the organization, speed, time, and all those things. You're right. But you got to get ahead of that beforehand. Set the expectations with the executive team. Set the expectations with the board. That's what your CISO should be doing, so that they understand the fact that you're putting in a governance mechanism that's going to help them. And then you got to be realistic, right? Because you can't stop it. However, you can do something to say, okay, here's our minimum posture and scoring. Now, before you're moving that application, you have to tell us when you're going to migrate. I need to see the budget line that it's actually funded to do it, right? So you're holding accountability. So you're accepting the risks as it's migrated because of the business speed and culture and all those things. I wish we lived in that world where we could prevent that from happening 100%. But once you get this process in, you can. But during that transition time, don't give up. Hold the line and say, okay, I understand we need to do this. I understand we're not ready for this. However, can I just make sure that that is actually budgeted, that the fix is in there, and it's with a funded budget line so that you can carry it through and make sure that that posture is there. Third thing I want to talk to you about is about emerging technologies, and in particular how we deal with them, and we'll use quantum computing as an example. So as security professionals, what should we be thinking about? Here's this new capability everybody is talking about. It has to do with computational speed and the ability to do unique things we haven't thought about. So what are we thinking about today? Well, I would tell you the things you need to be thinking about is there a way to make your controls quantum resistant? What is the risk? We'll use encryption as an example. There's great concern because of the computational power that some encryptions won't be strong enough. Well, what are vendors doing? What are other things doing to make them quantum resistant? There are tools, there are techniques. So as you're thinking about this emerging technology and how it's going to impact your organization, and we've got a runway in front of us. It's not like this is a clear and present threat. It's an emerging threat. But what we should be thinking about as professionals with our control stack that exists today, what risks are going to become present as a result of this new potential enablement? And what you should be thinking about is, what do you need to change about your control profile? What do you need to push your vendors to do with their own products to make them quantum resistant? Get ahead of it. Don't wait for it to come. Try to get ahead of it. Now, with all that said, the most important piece as security professionals, if we've done it right, we've got a workforce of knowledgeable people. We've got a framework of execution that allows us to bring things into the cloud or begin to think about emerging technologies. The last piece is about assurance. All right, as security professionals, one of the most important things that we do is help the organization operate within their risk tolerance. As you can hear me talking about, operate within your risk tolerance. Because unfortunately, the adversaries have so many more opportunities to take advantage of us than we can actually shore up. And we only have so much budget. And by the way, we only have so much time because of the natural changing environment of an IT operation, an enterprise-wide operation, as well as the businesses and the missions that operate off of it. So we have to be prepared for that. So what do we need to be thinking about? We always need to be thinking about automation. Today we've got artificial intelligence and machine learning as far as concepts that we're hearing about. But more importantly, it's really around, I'm just going to call it automation, and I'll put AI and machine learning into that. Because what we got to strive for is to provide the organization a level of assurance that the control framework and the controls that are enabled are actually working within what they believe they are. It always amazes me, if I was sitting on a board of directors, the question that I would be asking my CISO always would be is, hey, how do we know how effective our controls are today? How do we know they're actually working? Right? Everyone always asks me what keeps me up at night. It's being able to answer that question. Because we've invested a lot in technologies and we've done configurations, but how do we know? So the thing I would want you all to encourage to think about it from an insurance standpoint that I think is a very evolving area is the whole idea of measuring control effectiveness. And how do you go about doing that? One particular way is utilizing things like attach breach simulation or cyber range. Now, with the attack breach simulation, what's really nice about that and how you utilize that is you're actually launching what the TTPs and IOCs may be like for different type of actors in your environment, which you're then able to get a measurable view of how well your controls are working. Is it perfect? No, right? But it's something. And with some tweaking and some of your own system integration work, you might even make it even better. But clearly, the ability to do that is extremely powerful. Let's use an example. So the recent conflict, Ukraine and Russia, there was tremendous concern about how would that impact your enterprises, right? So every CISO was being asked, what is our chance of being impacted? What is our risk associated with it? And from a U.S. government standpoint, there was lots of information being shared on TTPs and IOCs, tremendous amounts of information. But only a few organizations, at least that I know of, had the capabilities that they were able to take that information. So know what vulnerabilities are normally exploited by a bad actor, what type of techniques that they're utilizing, and launch those into their environment in a simulated space and be able to say, how well did my controls do against that? How well could I combat if that type of attack was presented? And then present that to your board is very, very powerful. Now, the score may not be what you want it to be, but at least you answered the question and you try to quantify it in some fashion, right? Find out your network's actually not segmented because here's the bleed over of malware across what you were doing. Or you thought you had this control enabled, and look, it actually doesn't work if you actually launch a malware across that. The EDR wasn't configured properly. So when you're looking at addressing these issues, always keep in mind on that last step, it's assurance. And using automation to do that is critical. So here's a framework that I utilize for that. As security professionals in general, I found we are excellent at the first phase, which is identifying the risks. I'm sure we all have more than enough work that we're looking to do and risks that we're looking to mitigate. So we're pretty good at that. Then the second phase is you got to collaborate across the enterprise, because a large part of this isn't work that we actually do. We either have to work with someone to do a change, i.e., patch, or we need to work with an entity, business, mission owner, whatever, to say, hey, we need to make some fundamental changes here because this is how your environment is working. So it's that collaboration, and I call it the solutioning phase. And actually, we're not bad at that also. Some organizations better than others. But we get to the point that we know what to do. But the third phase is where I find most organizations struggle, and that's the actual remediation. It's the getting the funding for it. It's also not chasing the symptom, but understanding the root cause and focusing on the efforts to eliminate the root cause and just not the symptom. But it's difficult because this is where you jump into your budget issues. This is where you get into your RACI and accountability issues of who does what. And then more importantly, who is tracking it and who is reporting it, so it doesn't kind of just go away in the noise of the next crisis from the next day, because there's always another crisis. So that's where I think that one of the biggest gaps exists today with what we're doing and how we deal with any issue. And then the last piece, assurance. And when I look at high-performing teams, this is where I think the ones that separate themselves is when they're able to provide assurance, primarily through automation, preferably not manual. We're actually able to demonstrate that the controls work. And more importantly, as we just went through that risk has now been mitigated, but now they're actually continuously monitoring it, whether that's through AI, machine learning, or something else, or another technology, to make sure the misconfiguration doesn't occur, or whatever the root cause was that caused it doesn't come back, and is able to report on that in a frequent basis. So that timeline and that results drives it. So using something like breach attack simulation from a cloud deployment standpoint, or even the future of quantum computing, how do you know you're resistant against a quantum attack? Now, granted, we're not reading and hearing about all that, but that's the future that we need to think about. How are we going to assure against that? One way to do that is obviously through something like a breach attack simulation, or even using your environment in a cyber range or something else like that. I'm going to go ahead and try to wrap up and open up the opportunity for some questions. So in closing, when I think about this particular topic, remember, it's not about saying no anymore. It's about identifying the way to get to yes through transparency and ensuring the risk is understood and holding the line from an accountability standpoint. There is not an organization or a board that doesn't want to support that, but it's about how you do it, the style in your approach, and the way you communicate it. Think about it thoughtfully and get ahead of it. There's nothing better than getting ahead and saying, this is an emerging area, this is an emerging risk, and this is what we're going to do about it. What are we going to do about it? We're going to make sure we have the talent. We're going to make sure we understand the impact and put the processes and the capabilities. And then we're going to make sure we have a way to assure that the risk is mitigated to whatever collectively our risk appetite is. I guarantee if you talk to your leadership in that way, and you talk to your boards in that way, you'll get the support that you need in order to be successful. I appreciate your time this morning. I appreciate what you all do for your organizations. And I also applaud you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to come here to learn more and to listen and to stretch your minds. Thank you. So we have a mic. Anybody can walk around for questions, or if you're one of those people that wants your question to come from your neighbor next door, you can also go on the app, and somebody is looking at the app and can pass the question. Yes, sir.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Mark Novak. I work in applied research into emerging technologies for a major financial institution. So I heard you speak about emerging technologies, but in the context of emerging threats, so quantum computing. I'm wondering about how your advice would be different if the emerging technology is not around a new threat you need to deal with, but a new type of protection you can deploy. So my passion is actually around confidential computing, so silicon-assisted isolation of data in use. And what I find is a regulated institution will not lift a finger until there are compliance requirements compelling it to do so, right? So meeting compliance obligations is very important, but security less so. Honestly. So would your advice be around adopting emerging technologies that are not yet table stakes for your compliance posture?
Great question. So again, if I reflect back on my years of experience, Listen, when you look at normally what an information security budget is, right, primarily 80% of it is geared towards driving remediation, right? You're just fixing things. 10% is really about spending it in a way to make your team even better. And only about 10% is that investment. So I think we have to step back as professionals and recognize that and choose that area of investment that is around the emerging areas. So your example, sir, would be my view on that would be is there's always a percentage of your budget that you need to think about, and just got to pick and choose and utilize it in that fashion. And by the way, that's what the board wants to know. Because everyone thinks today, many people have gotten plus-ups, and you've read about some CEOs out there talking about they're spending $1 billion in cyber. When you peel that back, right, they're mostly doing IT modernization projects, right, as an example. So investment in cyber usually is much smaller because I hate to say this, who cares about the emerging technology if you're not doing the basics well? So an organization has to get that strong foundation of security principles before they start talking about advanced things. Because if you're leaving all the doors and windows open with traditional things like patch management, that's where an adversary is going to get to you. And irregardless of what defense you put in place, because they will try to circumvent it, because there's many different avenues to get there. So it's important. We just have to be realistic to ourselves that it's a small piece of what we're doing until our organization gets to that level. Then, by the way, ironically, then you see the shift. Maybe now you're spending 20% in investment. But in general, most organizations, I think, are operating in that kind of matrix. Another question?
Hi. So my name is Ace Swirling. I'm a consultant with the Cortac Group, which is a local consultancy, and we're focusing on CMMC compliance for the Department of Defense contractors. And I wanted to press on two questions that we've really kind of run into. One has to do with the governance items that you were alluding to. So, working with the executives to understand the budgeting impacts and all of that. The regulations right now tell you what you need to do, and they tell the executives they need to spend money, but there's not really closing that loop. And then the second piece has to do with closing the loop with respect to managed service providers around shared responsibility matrices. So a lot of the defense industrial-based companies are implementing cloud solutions to comply with CMMC, and they need help to do that. And sort of that shared responsibility is not really all that clear. So my question to you is, from your perspective, how can we start to work on improving the governance, both with the executives within the companies, within these OSCs, and then also how do we manage the governance and the shared responsibility as these organizations are asking for help implementing cloud solutions?
So I think the first step always is about the data, right? Bring the truth, bring the data, bring the transparency. What does the data mean? Does it correlate to a particular risk and the probability of exploitation of the data? Compliance doesn't necessarily mean you're more secure. So it's about bringing the right data to the right individuals. I have a very simple framework. Know about it, get it, use it. If I'm knowing about something and I'm not getting it, it doesn't matter. If I'm knowing about it and getting it and I'm not using it, it's a big paperweight. So getting the right data and then putting into a context so that the organization and the culture knows about it. Listen, if there's one thing I've learned in my 20 plus years and working for many different organizations, you have to spend time to understand your organization and the culture and how they operate it and put it in that context to drive the change. It's how do you get their attention? And I have found truth with data and transparency, then with appropriate visibility, meaning this is how it impacts my organization, this is how it impacts my mission. You've got to get the organization thinking like that and knowing like that, and then they will get behind and they will enable. But the challenge oftentimes is we're going in and trying to kind of scare and do different things, when the reality of it is we're just talking about operating within defined policies, but through transparency and data is how I think you can drive that change.
Hi, I'm Morgan Zantua. I'm City University, the director for the Center for Cybersecurity Innovation. We're a center of academic excellence with the NSA. And I met one of your people in Denver about, anyway, Jennifer's in linguistics. So my question is, workforce was your topic, first thing you mentioned. And we deal with incumbent workers and upskilling adults. We're also starting to focus on the pipeline, the career pathway is the new word. How do we get the attention of the membership here and corporations to help us to start investing in getting the attention of middle school and high school students so they can come out with a CCSK when they graduate high school?
So having raised 3 children that are now off either in college or graduate programs, it's difficult. It's difficult because you're asking a question related to individuals that have no idea really what it is to be an information security professional, even with their own family members or actually in the field. So the challenge there is we have to go at this from a digital citizenship standpoint, where they're understanding the fact that their lives are now tied right to this digital platform, and a part of that is being safe. No different than any kind of, I'll call it, safety protocols or awareness programs that we try as our children grow up or as a society grows up. So it's about how to make it part of what they do naturally, and then obviously it's also around helping them understand what a career would look like. So my idea has always been, we really need to go back and do one of those public service announcements, kind of like we did. For those of you that go back this far, you might remember we had one that I still remember as a child, where it was the Indian with a tear due to the pollution and the garbage in the rivers. I think we need to start doing something around from a cyber standpoint, from that standpoint, to kind of get that awareness up.
More.
Yep. I'm out of time, so I don't know how much more they'll let me do, but go ahead.
Well, I want to talk about talent. You've worked in the private and public sector. You've managed thousands of people. It used to be that the lag between new technology and the labor force to fill the gaps was, I remember when it was nine months, and now it's 3 to 5 years. It's getting worse. What are your thoughts on why the private and public sector cannot tackle this problem? Why is it getting worse? Why can't they develop people or find the talent to be able to fill these gaps? Because it is getting worse. And the more talent, the more new technology accelerates, the worse the problem gets. Now, I work for an analyst firm that for 25 years, that's all we think about and talk about. We interview thousands of companies. But I'd like your thoughts on this.
Sure. So that's a hard question to answer. So I will reflect back on what I've seen as far as success. So once upon a time, there was a company called Network General. Just curious, anybody remember them? All right, take you back. Sniffers, right? So way back when, in the early 2000s, right? Even before that, right? Those of you that know, sniffer is really a LAN analyzer that kind of emerged into steroids. You could actually do everything from AV on it to IDS and IPS and all these things. Highly technical tool that required skill to actually run it. You could buy it, but your ROI would not be good unless you did it. And I still remember the actual CEO and the executive team said, don't sell it unless they buy training with it. And it was proud. Actually, we developed Sniffer University. We developed a worldwide Sniffer certification program with it. And the amount of people that did it was amazing, right? That were all doing it. And ultimately, it created a very strong understanding. And you could go hire people with those skill sets based on the fact that they attained that certification and the whole bit. But my point for that is I believe and every company I have the opportunity to advise on, formally and informally, I always think about that particular example. Because in the end, just like you said, if you have a technology and nobody in that organization is your champion or can actually use it and perform critical thinking, so it's being utilized not just to deal what it's supposed to do, but what's going on in your environment. So my philosophy to that would be is every organization should take pride in the fact of how are they making sure that the users of their product are using it at the highest level possible. And if we did that, and organizations actually used the tech that they have and were knowledgeable, we'd be significantly more secure and significantly more aware. Since that company doesn't really exist anymore, I thought I'd use that as an example. But I'll give you one more example of things that I'm seeing that I'm impressed with that I think is the right approach. There's another company that I'm aware of that now is actually providing to you a score based on how well you're using their tool. So it's awareness. You get to choose what level of maturation you want to use the tool for. There are some things you may not want to enable, but you consciously make that decision. You consciously accept that risk, and maybe you drive, it's part of now your plan, to improve it. So my answer to that question is we can close the gap by, I think, organizations creating things specifically that allows people to be experts on their products, which ultimately broadens your horizon, which gives us a workforce. And now you're learning, but now you can transcend the different technologies and you can go work on emerging technologies and you'll feel more comfortable. That combined with all the programs that we have, hopefully will drive that behavior. And by the way, there are wonderful things available in the government today. Those of you that aren't aware of the Cyber Corps, tell everybody, right? I actually believe we're not even using all the scholarships that are available. What a way. Go get a degree, a guaranteed job, do an internship. Yes, you got to serve your government as part of that. Every year you're on scholarship, you actually work in the government for a year. But what a great way to learn a trade and also to be professionalized in this area. So I think the combination of the vendor world and what we're doing with the government, as well as organizations like CSA, you combine all that together. The platforms are there, but how do we incentivize the behavior to go there and also entice people to want to continue to grow and learn? I think I'm out of time. All right. Thank you again. I appreciate it.